sitting down, we're not filmed.
Yeah, should we start up on that way?
Yeah.
Sure.
Good evening, everyone. Hello and welcome. Welcome to the third meeting of Elbows Up Canada, or Elbows Up Toronto, part of Canada. My name is Linda McDonald. It's my co-chair.
I'm Theo Heinzman.
And we have a banner that's brand new for today. So I'd like to welcome everyone here. Thank you. It's a great turnout. We have some wonderful speakers that we will be able to share their knowledge with you tonight. What I'd like to do is start with a land acknowledgement. We'll acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So I'd just like to pause for a moment so everyone can reflect on what that land acknowledgement means to them personally, and then we'll get started. Thank you. So Theo and I are the face that you see at these public meetings, but we have a steering committee that meets every Tuesday night, works very, very hard to put together these meetings and to keep things going, keep the momentum up. So a lot of really smart people working to pull these things together. Theo and I just stand up and look like we did it all. So what Elbows Up Toronto is it's a citizen-led, nonpartisan group, was put together, started with John Sewell and Ken Greenberg. And what we're trying to do is find a place where Canadians can come together, Torontonians can come together, where we can share what we're experiencing, we can share ideas, and we can feel like we're part of something together. We're not alone, and we're supporting each other. We're also providing a bit of a clearinghouse and bringing people in who can share a lot of knowledge with us for those who are thinking about, well, what can I do? What actions can I take? Either personally or with others in my community. And certainly there are lots of groups out there forming their own groups, in different neighborhoods, different cities across Canada. So we're here to kind of help and be a bit of a clearinghouse. All of our meetings are videotaped, and so if you go to our website, if you can't make one of our meetings, lucky you get to watch it online if you want to, all 90 minutes of it. So that's kind of who we are. Theo's going to share a little bit of what we heard at last week's meeting.
Hi, everyone. At last week's meeting, we had Ken Greenberg, Olivia Chow, and Kathleen Wynne speak, and they all said some really interesting, insightful words that helped me think about how we can navigate this moment. So I'm just going to share some of the key takeaways. Ken's point was really around fixing what we can in Toronto and not just focusing on what is going on in other places around the world. He talked a lot about building housing and protecting our green space. And I think that's a really important thing to think about in this moment, is to not get too overwhelmed with the global chaos, but to focus on working on what we can do here in Toronto. And I think coming out to this meeting is a perfect example of people doing just that. The other key theme was unity. So Olivia Chow talked a bit about the unity between consumers who are buying Canadian goods at this time and political leaders who are not paying for contracts from American companies, and just that full-on collective unity to support Canada, and in that case, buy Canadian at this current moment. And Kathleen Wynne talked about unity from her perspective, which is a deep knowledge of provincial politics, and how now more than ever we need our provincial leaders to come together and build unity, and not just amongst themselves, but with leaders in other countries, even in America, and those that are willing to stand with Canada at this time. Something from the news that really kind of brought that unity point home for me was what we've seen with Trump's tariffs over this past week, and how Canada is far from the only country suffering at the hands of the US right now. And there's a lot of relationships between Canada and other countries, and inter-country unity to be built at this moment. So I just thought that was a really positive way to think about the moment, and to continue to think about the opportunities that arise from these challenging times. And Linda is going to actually share a couple of positive news stories that have come up over the past week, so I'll hand it back to Linda.
Thanks, Theo. I'm the short one here. So one of the other things, just to add to Theo's comments, was when Ken Greenberg spoke, he reminded us that part of our strength as Canadians is taking care of ourselves and making our cities strong. And part of what we need to do and keep doing is building more housing so that everyone has housing. We need to take care of our food security. We have to protect our farmers and agricultural land. We have to protect our water. We need clean water. We need to protect our watersheds. So things we can be doing, we should be doing anyways, in Ontario. And Ken talked about, like, we have to infuse new meaning into what made in Canada means to all of us. So I found that very inspiring. I don't think Ken is here tonight, but he had some very good words for us. Some other good news from this week in terms of unity is the rally that happened in Buffalo, where the Americans stood up across the river from Niagara Falls and holding their elbows up for Canada, which was great to see. We also had Elbows Up Canada held a rally in Halifax yesterday. They've been moving across the country, so Halifax had their rally yesterday. There was also the Hands Off protest that happened in the weekend in the US, where Americans stood up and said, enough. And across 50 states, hundreds of thousands of Americans showed up and said, this is not who we are, and this is not what we want. And part of that was we don't bully our neighbors. So that was great news in terms of solidarity and unity, just not in Canada, but outside of Canada. So that was very good news. Theo, do you want to explain the Instagram?
Oh, very good point. Almost forgot. At the end, we're going to do a little question period. And if anyone wants to submit a question that I can read out, go on our Instagram and on our story. You'll be able to ask questions throughout the talks. And then at the end, we'll read them out and kind of get a bit of a discussion going.
Okay, enough of us. Time to get on to our first speaker. So our first speaker, Vanmala Subramaniam, and I apologize in the pronunciation. She is a journalist with Globe and Mail and has written recently about the great difficulties of crossing the border into the United States, with risks of border guards demanding to search your phone for criticisms of Donald Trump and possible detainment. She has also been, in today's Globe, a very good article about the automobile industry and the impact that the tariffs are having on the industry. So she wasn't able to be here in person tonight, but she very kindly has agreed to join us on Zoom, so welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. I just want to check if people can hear me okay, yeah? That's good. So yeah, I've really a bunch of things I want to talk about, and I hope that the reception is okay and I'm not too frozen. But first of all, you know, I wrote a piece that was basically about lawyers in the US warning people, say Canadians who hold work visas and live in the US, to be cautious about traveling. Because there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to be let back in as seamlessly as perhaps you would have in the past. And these are American firms sort of putting out notices to, you know, TN visa holders, H-1B visa holders, you know, Canadians and the rest. Now, one of the things that happened last week was the Canadian government actually put out its own travel advisory telling Canadians to sort of exercise scrutiny. They were a little bit vague, but you know, they were basically warning people that, look, your phones could be searched, your devices could be searched. This is legal. The you know, US border guards are allowed to do things like this, and so don't be surprised if, you know, it does happen. And so, you know, all these things are interesting to me, and I really want to sort of articulate the context of this in the next, say, 8 minutes or so. One of the things I think that's really important to understand is that the US border has never been an easy place to cross into if you are of a certain demographic. I mean, post 9/11, it was very, very difficult for Muslims, people born in Muslim countries, where even if you have a Canadian passport and it says your birthplace is Karachi, Pakistan, you might be held up in secondary screening, you might be asked more questions. In a worst case scenario, you might be turned back. The data that we have limited in the sense that you don't know yet, you know, Trump just took office in January. You don't know yet whether the incidences of people being questioned, detained, you know, sent back home, you don't know whether they're higher. They seem to be kind of standard, but I don't think we have enough data to draw a massive conclusion. But what we do have is very clear sort of standout examples of, you know, routine visa renewals at the border. The case of Jasmine Mooney, a Canadian actress who worked for a hemp company, you know, is in the sort of wellness space. She went to the border at San Diego. She was renewing her visa. And by the way, for a TN visa, it's not uncommon to go to a border crossing with all your documents and get the visa issued then and there. And she had done that in the past. She had some kind of discrepancy on her application. Things weren't matching. They looked into her background. They started asking her a whole bunch of questions, and before she knew it, she was shipped off to a detention center. Now, that is very unusual, that you are now being detained and not just put back on a plane to go home. So, she says that they said she was detained because she refused to get on a plane. She says that's not true. And it was very arbitrary. And, this is not the only case. We saw a couple of cases of German tourists who didn't have their paperwork in order for a tourist visa. One case, the guy was accused of overstaying his tourist visa. He was also detained. So I think coming back to the Canadian government's advice, and there has been a problem to get the Canadian government to issue this advisory. Part of that is just reminding people that we live in times that are just slightly different, and you do run the risk perhaps of not just being sent home, but being detained, which I think is a very sort of scary prospect for obviously a lot of people. But I just want to come back to my point about how the US border, I hope I'm not frozen right now. I feel like I might be. Never mind, I'll keep talking. I just want to come back to my point about the US border. America is a country that really takes its immigration laws very seriously. You can't go in there and make mistakes when you answer questions. You cannot tell lies. They have always had the power to search your devices. And I think what's different right now is that the existence of the Trump administration in the White House is emboldening Border Patrol officers, ICE officers, so that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to actually act on things and, go out there and, detain people. They might ask you more questions than usual. So, you kind of need to be a little bit cautious when crossing the border. I think from talking to now, very many lawyers, many of whom work at the border, at the land border, and who deal with a lot of business travel and people, trying to get work visas to work in the US, they are saying that you maybe, if you don't have a need to travel out of the US, if you're a Canadian living there and you want to invest, you should not travel out of the US right now unless it's an emergency, which I think is sort of a very telling statement to people. The second thing I want to talk about, I'm sorry that the internet is just not cooperating. I hope you can hear me. But the second thing I wanted to talk about was there's a dual issue of what's going on in the US right now with non-US citizens, students in particular, international students who have found to be participating in demonstrations about the Palestinian cause, to be targeted and taken by ICE officials and, okay, audio's clear, the video pauses, okay, good. Taken by ICE officials and detained. So, and there's so many examples of this now. They're trickling in drips and drabs, but we can see them. So, Mahmoud Khalil, the most prominent example, the Columbia University student, he really he's an activist, he's a political protester. He led the movement to build the encampment in Columbia in protest against the war in Gaza. And so, he was taken in and I think held up as a symbol of, hey, we can do this to someone, we can revoke their green card. And now we're seeing a Turkish student from Tufts University, the same thing happened to her. And I could go on. Dropsite News, actually a pretty good independent news site, has a very good list of all the international students being sort of, detained. I mean, if you are in the US, and you're an international student, you're visibly participating in demonstrations. And when I say this, I mean you are posting about it on your social media, you are, you talk about it very openly. And again, these are your First Amendment rights in the US. In this current climate, what I'm seeing, and from my own reporting, there is a risk of you now being sent back or being worse still detained. So we have an environment right now that is very unusual, and I think a lot of free speech advocates are very alarmed about it. I think we as Canadians should be quite alarmed about it as well, because this is a country that I think we used to take for granted, how we can just travel in and out seamlessly, especially if you are non-South Asian or Middle Eastern. You always have had a privilege as Canadians to be able to go in and out of the border, and I think it is time to be a little bit aware of that privilege, and maybe that you have to have your paperwork in order and be prepared to wait longer at the border if you want to get in. So I think that's the climate we're in. I think the final thing I'll say, because I've been speaking for about 10 minutes, is that the cross-border travel data is fascinating to me. You're finding that there's a huge decline in the number of Canadians crossing into the US border. I looked up the 2024 data for the number of visits of Canadians going into the US by the land border, and it was 20.4 million. So visits, I mean, that could be, there was an analytics company recently, an aviation analytics company recently, that forecasted that for the summer months, there's going to be a 70% decline in travel from Canada to the US by air. And Air Canada has actually already said that their bookings are declining. They're about 10% last month. And we're seeing the same thing at the land border. So I think it's interesting to me, because I think Canadians are taking heed. I don't think they're traveling to the US unnecessarily. I mean, the data seems to suggest that. But what will be more interesting, and I intend to keep reporting on this, is when we know exactly how many people, Canadians, also temporary residents of Canada who might be visiting the US or residing in the US temporarily, people like international students here, temporary foreign workers, how many of those people are actually being held up at the border. I'm curious to see if the Trump administration is actually very different. Because one thing that I will point out is, the Biden administration, when it came to deportations, so the number of people who overstayed, visa overstayers in the US, whom they deported. The Biden administration deported far more people than the Trump administration did. Trump won. So I want to bring this point up to say that this is not just a Republican thing, but I think it's been heightened right now because of Trump's overarching executive order on securing the border. And I'll instructions from you guys. Can you hear me right now? Okay, I'm not sure what part I stopped talking at, but I think I was talking about how the Biden administration was not, any better when it came to deportations, and I'm not sure if the audience heard that point.
We don't know how long or if we're going to have Vanmala back at the end. So does anyone have any questions? Oh, do you want to come up, or I can bring you a mic?
My question is, and it sounds cheeky, but it's not, but if this shows up on our social media feeds, you know, I posted Elbows Up Toronto on mine own, is that the kind of thing that the Border Patrol would be so paranoid about that they would actually look at that as a sign of dissension?
Thanks for the question. I, to be perfectly honest, I don't know, because I think I guess the answer would be, if you are, sorry, can you guys still hear me, by the way? Because I can see myself frozen. Oh, okay, good. So I guess just to be cautious and vigilant that your phone can be searched. So if your phone's searched, you just don't know what's going to happen, right? Like there might be a border guard who's just not happy with what you post on social media and looks at it. I mean, I've had journalist friends who've had their phones, you know, searched and their social media tracked. So if they don't like your political views, they can deny, you know, you refuse the right of entry. They have that power, obviously. But I think, again, the thing, personally, if I travel to the States, I don't intend to, but if I did, and if I had to for work, I would absolutely take a burner phone and I would wipe everything from my phone. I would not let them look at my social media and my sort of personal political viewpoints.
Can you pass the mic down? Thanks.
I'd just like to ask if you have Gmail or you have your email on your phone. They can.
Sorry, I've lost audio on my side. I can't hear you. But if someone can type in the question, I will be happy to answer it.
Okay, they're going to do that.
Do I speak?
Yeah, just ask a question.
I'd like to know if you have your email on your phone, if you just should, since most of us probably have bad things from the Trump perspective on our email, we should definitely not take that phone with us to the States, or we should wipe it, or we should get a burner, the way they do on TV.
I did hear that. I am cautious. Being a journalist, I'm cautious, and because I talk to lawyers about this stuff, especially for the piece that I did, I am somewhat more, I suppose, you know, vigilant about it, and I would err on the side of caution. So, you know, yeah, I guess they have the right, again, as I, you know, told the previous guest, they have the right to just look at anything they want on your phone, and, you know, if they see an email they don't like, then they could just ask you more questions about it, and, you know, you might just take longer to cross the border. I can't answer that, but I think that the advice you would probably get from a lawyer is to maybe, if you choose and if it's not inconvenient for you, to reduce your risks of being probed by just not having any of those apps on your phone, like say delete them, so when they scroll through it they can see like a shopping app or something like that.
I have heard rumors, and I'm not sure, but maybe you know, is it true that ICE has a quota that they have to pick up a certain amount of people and ship them off down to El Salvador or wherever they ship them, or do you know if that's true or not?
I don't. I am definitely not the best person to answer this, but I can only, what I do know about the position ICE is in right now as it links to Trump's executive order is, Trump's executive order was a very broad-based one. It was basically saying that I'm giving you the tools to secure the border, whatever means necessary. And I guess that is sort of, that correlates, or, subsequently, that has meant that ICE and border officials have felt much more emboldened to act on certain, things, say a list that's sent to them. I cannot speak to the El Salvadorians per se, but I do think that ICE is really cracking down right now.
Last question here. Okay, I think we're gonna move on. Thank you very much, Vanmala.
Thank you.
We've all heard about the Trump administration strategy of flooding the zone when it comes to chaotic information, so no one can make sense of it. So it's very important to have journalists who are doing their best to give clear and concise information to make sure we all know what is actually going on in the world. And I think it was good to hear that, we all know this, but Canadian travel numbers are down so much going into the US. That's just another way to show that Canadians aren't going to stand for what's happening in the US, and that's one way to make it clear. Our next, here, just got to get a bit sorted. Our next speaker is going to be an announcement. So it's going to be Howard Green and Reverend Paul Shepherd from the United Church. If you guys are here, oh yeah, come on up.
Thank you very much. And when I talked to John about this presentation, I didn't know it was an announcement, but it's going to be more of a presentation that Reverend Dr. Paul Shepherd and I will be making about an issue that some of you may or may not be aware of. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here. My name is Howard Green, and I am a member of a coalition of civil society, nonprofits, labor, faith, and other related organizations coming together because our democracy and beloved Charter of Rights and Freedoms is under threat right here in Toronto. The City of Toronto is following a shockingly number of municipalities who have or are considering implementing bylaws, so-called bubble zones, that would restrict protests that are allowed to happen. For example, in June 2024, the City of Vaughan passed the bylaw to prohibit what they called nuisance demonstrations within a certain distance from vulnerable social institutions, with a penalty of up to $100,000 for violating this bylaw. Currently, the City of Toronto proposal would create a bylaw, perhaps modeled on the City of Vaughan's, one that would pose limitations to prevent protests within certain distances of places of worship, faith-based schools, cultural institutions, which could include museums, theaters, recreation centers, and anything else the council chooses to include within their definition. The coalition that I'm a part of has 24 organizations from labor to environment who have been raising the alarm about this attack on our charter rights and freedoms. Our right to free expression, our right to protest, our right to picket, our right to have our voices heard by people making choices that impact our lives, which is why we formed the Coalition for Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Recently, the Canadian Centre for Civil Liberties Association wrote to the mayor and councillors about the proposed bylaw and indicated that freedom of peaceful assembly protects public gatherings such as demonstrations, protests, sit-ins, as long as they are peaceful, is a fundamental freedom that invigorates dialogue on issues of public interest. This right has little meaning without broad access to public spaces for the purpose of communicating a message. We cannot allow the City Council and Mayor to silence and control us. Of course, we understand concerns around harassment, incitement, and hate speech. But we know there are already laws to address any protest that encourages or practices violence. The city released an online survey, I'm not sure how many of you have seen it, about this proposed bylaw. The survey is deeply flawed. There is no way to confirm that people responding actually live in Toronto. They can fill it out multiple times. Or people haven't even been able to understand the biases inherent in the questions. The Civil Liberties Association has written about the survey as well. One key example, the survey continues to refer to vulnerable social institutions, making it seem like these civic and religious institutions need to be protected. Reverend Dr. Paul Shepard will speak to that in a minute. But so we encourage you here tonight to contact the mayor and council. Tell them you oppose the whole idea of a bylaw. It will not make our city safer. Even the police have said this bylaw is unnecessary. And make sure they understand that there are already laws in the books to protect people from threats, abuse, or hate. Introducing this bylaw will only punish people who are exercising the thing that really elbows up is about the Canadian Charter of Freedoms and Rights. So, make it clear to the city that we do not support losing these hard-earned rights. We will be doing more organizing around this issue. Keep in mind, April 17th is the 43rd anniversary of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We are hoping to have public demonstrations and other ways to make sure our voices are heard. So, we ask you to look out for more to come from our recently formed coalition. We hope Elbows Up volunteers will join us, and we will provide John with our information through the Elbows Up website. Paul?
Thank you, Howard. So I'm Reverend Shepard from the United Church, working in the United Church of Canada in Toronto. Don't be afraid of the caller. I will be brief. I'm not really going to preach. But I have to start by saying there's a question that's plagued us all, I think, as Canadians, is what is Canadian? And in particular, I would rather rephrase it, what does it mean collectively for us all to be Canadians? And it used to, in my day, it meant, well, we weren't Americans. Ever heard that one? So I've always wanted to have real conversation about what is Canadian identity. So this is a wonderful gathering. And I guess I just have to give a small shout out to Donald Trump who made this happen, right? Because I don't think we would have been meeting here without the current situation. But if we talk about Canadians, among other things, because I'm supposed to keep to a narrow window, Canadians at a minimum follow and respect the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and we respect national and international law. I think that's pretty basic. And one fundamental right for Canadians is the right to protest, also called the freedom of peaceful assembly. And as Howard mentioned, the City of Toronto is considering a bylaw to restrict protest near religious institutions, which I wanted to weigh in on. And I was trying to think of the technical term. I think it's crazy, because we already have a variety of laws in place to protect people from inappropriate behavior, hate speech, and all kinds of things. And here's the thing, that religious institutions, we sometimes do not adhere to local, national, and international laws, believe it or not. So it's crucial that Canadians are allowed to legally protest any organization that violates the laws, including religious institutions. No organization in Canada should be allowed to break the law and then hide behind a flag that says, well, we're religious, so you can't protest. And I want to up the ante just a little bit, because I'm in the United Church of Canada, and recently we've started saying the of part more, because we're not the United Church in Canada. We're not a church that could be anywhere and happens to be here. We are the United Church of Canada. We are of Canada. And so, because of that, I have a request for all of you, which is if my church ever breaks the law, please come and protest. This is how we move forward as a society. So to me, this is what it means to be a Canadian organization. So we respect laws, charters, things like that. And other citizens have to protest if that's not what's going on. Now, I just want to briefly broaden the conversation just a bit because I think we've been a little bit too polite as Canadians. I'm going off what Howard thinks I'm talking about now. But we've been too polite because often when we see injustice as Canadians, you know, maybe we don't speak up, right? So I just want to encourage everyone, all Canadians, to protest injustice when we see it. You know, elbows up. Elbows up, whether it's this kind or this kind, is a provocative term, right? Well, protests are also provocative. Gatherings like this are provocative. And, you know, nobody's going to give us our identity as Canadians, or if they do, we're not going to like it. Things Donald Trump says, for example. We need to work together collectively to forge our own identity. And working together, we can forge our identity to better protect ourselves from foreign threats. So this will happen as we all speak our minds through gatherings like this, protests and other things. And my hope is Canada is a place where all voices are respected, always. And just, I'm almost done. Before our voices can be respected, we have to voice them. This polite thing doesn't always work. So elbows up. First thing is speak up. That's it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
And then, thank you. So we're going to do something a little different now. We're going to have some music for our halftime. So we are very lucky today to have Noah Reid with us. And I'm sure many of you will recognize him when you see him. Noah is a Canadian-American actor and musician, best known for his work on the television series Franklin and Schitt's Creek. He has received a Canadian Screen Award for Schitt's Creek and a nomination for Best Original Song for his work in the feature film People Hold On. He recently starred in the play at Coal Mine Theatre, The Case for the Existence of God. So we're looking forward to your performance. Thank you, Noah.
Thanks for having me. I want to say thank you to Elbows Up TO for inviting me out tonight and for inviting all of you out. It's so great to see so many passionate Canadians and you know, thoughtful Canadians trying to come together in a strange time. I'm gonna play. I was gonna play you some of my songs, but I'm inspired because I think that one of our best exports in this country is culture, and particularly is music. And it doesn't have to be an export all the time. It can be for us, by us too. And so I'm gonna play you a couple of songs by some of my favorite Canadian songwriters. And I'll encourage you as I jump off here to, the way that we do in the grocery store when we look for the Made in Canada label, we can do that at local venues and record stores and bookstores and theaters and all of that too. So I know you're all doing that. Come over to the window, my little darling. I'd like to try to read your poem. I used to think I was some kind of gypsy boy before I let you take me home. So long, Marianne. It's time that we began to laugh and cry and cry and laugh about it all again. You can join me on the chorus if you want. Oh, you know I love to live with you, but you make me forget so very much. I forget to pray for the angel, and then the angels forget to pray for us. Now so long, Mary Ann, it's time we began to laugh and cry and cry and laugh about it all again. Well, we met when we were almost young, deep in the green lilac park. You held on to me like I was a crucifix as we went kneeling through the dark. And now so long, Mary Ann, it's time that we began to laugh and cry and laugh about it all again. Oh, you know you really are such a pretty one. I see you've gone and changed your name again. And just when I climb this whole mountainside to wash my eyelids in the rain, and now so long, Mary Ann, it's time that we began to laugh and cry and laugh about it all again. Thank you. Another one of my favorite Canadian guys. Let's see if you can figure out who this one is. Now that you've found yourself losing your mind, are you here again, finding out everything you thought you knew is gone and changing? Now that you made yourself love me, do you think I can change it in a day? How do I place you above me? Am I lying to you when I say that I believe in you? Ooh, 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 I believe in you. Coming to you at night, I feel your questions, I hear my doubts, hoping that maybe in a year or two that we could laugh and let it all out. But now that you made yourself love me, do you think I can change it in a day? How can I place you above me? And am I lying to you when I say, oh, that I believe in you? Ooh, oh, oh, I believe in you. Anybody? Who was that? Neil Young. You know that song. All right, I'll do one more for you. Many of you have seen the television show Schitt's Creek, I would imagine. I had the great pleasure of being a part of that show. I'm not going to sing you Simply the Best. It's not written by a Canadian. But I had the amazing pleasure and honor of getting to do a song to honor the great Catherine O'Hara when she won the Governor General's Award. And there was a kind of a question about what song it was going to be, and I knew it had to be a Canadian tune, and there was only one song that made sense to me, and it's one of my favorite songs in the world. And I was looking for a song that kind of connected to Catherine, and I think about the way that we think as Canadians about Catherine. We feel like she belongs to us and that we belong to her in some way. And I think that's how we feel about our cultural people, whether they're hockey players or they're singers or they're actors or whatever. When people go and make it somewhere else, we always cheer them on, and we love it. We love them even more when they come back, right? And they do something meaningful here on home soil. And Catherine is a Canadian, you know, and so I knew that she would deeply appreciate that sentiment. And I think that, you know, this song, to me, in so many ways, is how I feel about Canada. So I'll share it with you now. This is Joni Mitchell's Case of You. Just before our love got lost, you said, I am as constant as a northern star. And I said, constantly in the darkness, honey, where's that at? If you want me, I'll be in the bar. On the back of a cartoon coaster, in the blue of the TV screen light, I drew a map of Canada, oh Canada. With your face sketched on it twice. Now you're in my blood like holy wine. It tastes so bitter and so sweet now. I could drink a case of you. And I would still be on my feet. I would still be on my feet. I'm a lonely painter. I live in a box of paints, and I'm frightened by the devil, and I guess that I'm drawn to those ones who ain't afraid, yeah. And I remember when you told me that night, you said love is touching souls. And surely you touched mine, 'cause part of you flows out of me in these lines from time to time. And now you're in my blood like holy wine. You
Tastes so bitter and so sweet now. I could drink a case of you, and darling, I would still be on my feet. I'd still be on my own. You're in my blood like holy wine. You taste so bitter and so sweet now. I could drink a case of you, and I'll still be on my feet. I'll still be on my feet. Thank you so much. Elbows up. Go Canada.
That was amazing. I'm actually, for Noah, I'm going to Hydra next month because I love Leonard Cohen and I watched an amazing documentary based in Hydra. I got to say that was one of the finest So Long Marianne covers I've ever heard. So, well done. Thank you very much. Okay, so our next speaker is Naomi Klein. She's also going to be joining us virtually. Naomi is an award-winning journalist, columnist, and the international best-selling author of 9 books, published in over 35 languages, including No Logo, The Shock Doctrine, This Changes Everything, No Is Not Enough, On Fire, and Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World. A columnist for The Guardian and contributor to Mehdi Hasan's Zitio, her writing has appeared in leading publications around the world. She is associate professor in geography at the University of British Columbia, where she is the founding co-director of UBC's Center for Climate Justice. Welcome, Naomi.
Hi. Hey, everyone. Can you hear me? I just want to make sure you can hear me. Hold on. Hold on. We should have done a check here. Okay. All right. I will assume you'll tell me if this isn't working. So I wish I could be with you. I know, having spent much of my adult life in Toronto, I live in Vancouver now. I'm sure that there are many people in that big room, which I know extremely well. I know that room very, very well. I think that's actually where I had the book launch for my first book, No Logo. And I'm sure there are lots of people in the room who I also know. And I'll bet that there are people in that room who I have protested with, and maybe even protested against free trade deals, like the free trade area of the Americas. Or I'm old enough to remember when we fought NAFTA. And I think there are some people in that room who remember it too. Now, I've heard a few people claiming, rather ignorantly, that Trump's tariffs are actually him fulfilling the demands of the progressive, what we used to call the ultra-globalization movement, which was indeed always opposed to deregulated trade. But the truth is that what Trump has done and is doing is the last thing that we wanted. And here I wanted to share a quote that I just read today from Public Citizen, which clarifies that what our movement was demanding was not an end to trade, but trade justice, which required much more than poorly designed tariffs. It demanded systemic reform, binding labor rights, climate protections, resilient supply chains, and democratic accountability. And of course, Trump offers the exact opposite of that. We never opposed trade. What we opposed actually was corporate rule. We opposed those bad trade deals because they represented the wish list of multinational corporations, most of them based in the United States. And now here we are, after 30 plus years of having that system in place, growing and strengthening. And now many of these same multinational corporations clearly believe that they can get an even better deal. And that is what we're seeing. We're seeing that for them, Trump is the enforcer. He has introduced across the board punishing tariffs, which he will lessen or lift if countries meet U.S. demands. It's what I have described as a mafia polar world. It's really a kind of a mafioso move. And this is an upside down world where the same U.S. corporations who wrote the rules of the road, grew unfathomably wealthy under those same rules, are now playing the victim because they think that they could do even better. So I think we should be very clear that what this represents is a kind of a last pillage, or at least that's what they're trying to do. Trump is causing enormous pain in the global economy, and definitely in Canada, in order to try to extract the last of those pro-corporate demands. Open up your markets to our banks, open up your markets to our healthcare companies, and on and on. Lower the last few protections that you have, or we will strangle you even further, which they can do pretty easily because after more than 3 decades of this so-called free trade, our economy is now so dependent and over-reliant on the US market that we can be bullied very easily. So that is what Trump's Treasury Secretary, a hedge fund billionaire named Scott Bessent, means when he said just this weekend that the tariffs are about global economic reordering. So as many have observed, this is a shock. And this strategy has been used again and again. I wrote about it in the shock doctrine. They would call it economic shock therapy. So you cause pain, and then you reap the rewards with the so-called therapy, which is always more deregulation, more handouts for companies, more deregulation. So we can and we must put our elbows up against all of that. But we also have to be very clear about what we mean when we say elbows up, what we are fighting against. And also, and this is just as important, what we are fighting for. Now, in the US, tens of thousands of people, just like us, have been packing stadiums to see Bernie Sanders and AOC and what they called the Fight Oligarchy Tour. And just this past weekend, we saw hundreds of thousands on the streets saying hands off democracy, hands off the courts, and so on. They understand that they aren't just fighting a single politician or a single billionaire or a single political party. They're up against a system, as we always have been, of corporate rule that has been building and building for a long time until reaching a full takeover of their government by a few large corporations. And we see this most clearly with Elon Musk running rampant. Now, that system of US-based corporate rule is definitely coming for Canada, including with threats of turning us into the 51st state, although they've cooled on that a little bit once they realized that it was hurting their friend, Pierre Poilievre. But don't worry, it's going to be back right after the election. So if we actually want to fight this, and we must, we have to be very clear about one thing. And I'm going to say this very clearly. We cannot fight U.S. oligarchy by caving in to Canadian oligarchy. That is exactly what many people who are wrapping themselves in the maple leaf would like us to do and are already doing. The effect of this is kind of like using the flag as a weighted blanket to try to get us to sleep and to forget what we know. So in the name of protecting Canada from the U.S., they are making us more like the U.S. already, handing out tax breaks to the wealthy, tearing up protections for the environment, for workers, and for Indigenous rights in the name of harmonizing trade across provincial borders, or in the name of fast-tracking oil, gas, and mining projects to diversify our economy. Now, they want to fight U.S. oligarchy with a made-in-Canada oligarchy. And to be clear, it's all very fine and well to buy Canadian, but if we're shopping from the handful of the massive transnationals that currently dominate our grocery sector, our banking sector, our media sector, then let's be real about that. Those companies aren't loyal to Canadians, aren't looking out for our interests any more than Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are looking after U.S. interests. If we want to fight Trump's attacks on Canada, we need to do more of what makes us different from the U.S. That means we strengthen our system of universal public health care. It means that we keep people in I can't really hear you, but I think you agree with me there. We need to keep people in their homes with bold policies like eviction moratoriums. We need to fund the CBC fully and push it to live up to its mandate, because that is part of what makes us different. But we've allowed it to erode. We need to protect and strengthen Indigenous land and title rights. We need to fund our public universities and research conducted in the public interests as the U.S. ravages theirs. We also need, and this is important, to act on that research and embrace science-based climate policies. In the face of Trump's hypernationalism, we need internationalism and multilateralism, not just Canadian nationalism. Canada should loudly and proudly be making common cause with all of the countries that Trump has attacked: Mexico, Panama, Denmark, Greenland, and many more. We have a tradition, a deep tradition of this kind of internationalism, but it has been steadily eroded by a culture of increasing militarism, which is shredding international humanitarian law. And nowhere more so do we see this than in Canada's shameful support of Israel's genocide in Gaza. If we want to be different, we need to act different. In the face of the Trump administration's racist, supremacist, homogenist view of the world, we need to actually live up to the values we like to tout in all of those ads. Being a welcoming country, a diverse country, a country with nation-to-nation relationships with First Peoples. Now, the reason I am Canadian, and I'm very grateful to be, is actually because my American parents were part of a wave of U.S. war resistors who didn't want to go to Vietnam and fled to Canada instead. This country opened its doors, and Canadians opened their hearts to my parents before I was born, and my father, who was in medical school at the time, was able to immediately finish his education at McGill University without missing a beat, despite being a war resistor. We should pick up on that proud tradition right now and provide funds to Canada's cash-strapped universities to welcome international scholars, faculty and students who are currently facing criminalization and deportation in the U.S. Let us be the safe haven for them that we were for my parents' generation. What we absolutely cannot do is allow our leaders to use this crisis, use this shock to tear up treaties with Indigenous people while fortressing our borders against those in need. We definitely cannot stand up to rising authoritarianism in the U.S. by weakening our commitment to freedom of speech and the freedom to dissent here in Canada. And from what I'm hearing from the previous speakers, that is precisely what Toronto City Hall is attempting to do. Do not let them. So while we put those elbows up to Trump and Musk, let us remember to extend our arms to one another and commit not to turning on the most vulnerable, not to letting any more of our neighbors fall through the cracks of our fraying social safety net, the very network of enmeshment that does the most to make us different from the United States. Finally, I want to end with a quote from Jayati Ghosh, economics professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, who worked for many years in India. She gave an interview today and pointed out that Trump's tariffs may have a silver lining, which is that it could finally be the impetus for poor countries to turn away from the failed promise of quote unquote export-led growth. And I think that the same is true for Canada and what could be a silver lining in all of this, which is that we could decide in response to this to truly diversify our economy, but not just by diversifying the customers for our oil and gas and mining projects, but to become resilient in investing in an ecologically sustainable economy that puts workers first, that respects Indigenous rights, that doesn't lead a race to the bottom. And I think we really do have a chance here. Thanks very much for including me.
Thank you, Naomi. Very inspiring. My daughter's out at UBC right now, so you may pass her someday on the mall. So let's see.
The cherry
Naomi,
blossoms are out.
Do you have a few minutes for questions?
Yeah, I have a few. Yeah, I have about 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Questions?
Hi there. Oh, sorry. So one of the safeguards that I've always thought existed in Canada against the rise of something as authoritarian as in the US right now is that it's a parliamentary system with multiple parties. But you're already seeing the polarizing in Canada between red and blue, so to speak. Are you finding that's something more for the purposes of this upcoming election or something more permanent?
Well, I hope it's not permanent, and I hope that it isn't the case for this election. I think people are afraid, and when Canadians are afraid, we tend to go to the sort of safety of those two parties. But the truth is that part of what makes Canada different in the ways that Canadians feel most passionately about. Like if you ask Canadians, like, what would you most be afraid of losing in becoming the 51st state? The first thing they'll talk about is healthcare. And the reason we have healthcare is because we have third parties, right? It was a push from Tommy Douglas and the NDP. So I know this is a nonpartisan event. And as everyone knows, my husband is running for the NDP in Vancouver Centre. But I will just say that I think this is part of refusing to be like the U.S. by actually leaning into the things that make us different. And as you point out, one of them is that we are a multi-party system that tends to do its best work when one of those major parties are under pressure from the left.
Hello. Are you familiar with Cory Doctorow's proposal to fight back against the tariffs by attacking the IP
Copyright.
laws?
Yeah, love it. Love that idea. Yes.
Okay. Would you care to expand? Because I suspect that is not as popular common knowledge as it might be.
Well, I'd encourage people to listen to Cory on this. He gave a really great long interview with Amy Goodman a few weeks ago, which really got into the details. But I mean, his argument is that Trump is tearing up the global trade order. They're hoping to get a better deal. But in the meantime, it begs the question of why we are obeying a set of rules that the U.S. is not obeying. And as we know, we have a system of global trade that covers every part of our economy, including very aggressive protections for intellectual property rights. So Cory has been making the case that the U.S. that Canada should feel less bound to rules against simple things like that you can't refill your own printer with cheap ink, or that you can't repair your iPhone, or all these things like that. So basically using this as a moment to have saner tech policies that allow for things like the right to repair. But yeah, I encourage people to do a deep dive into Cory's ideas. I'm just sort of third-hand version.
I read your books way back in the day when we were protesting globalization. If Trump is a blow to internationalism, the tariffs are also a blow to globalization. So how do we support internationalism without diving back into supporting a globalization that you've been critical of? How do you think of those two things?
Yeah, I mean, what I was saying is I don't really think that we should see this as a rupture with that order, which we always said, that we weren't opposed to it because we're opposed to trade. We're opposed to it because we're opposed to corporate rule. And Trump is, the very embodiment of that rule, like both himself as like the first kind of like CEO president, but also, outsourcing the actual governing to Elon Musk, who is decimating, what they call the administrative state, but basically they want to replace the whole thing with sort of privatized AI. This really is sort of the final frontier of economic, of privatization of the state. So I think it's a mistake to see this. I mean, they are tearing up the rules, but they're tearing up the rules so that they can have an even more sort of fortress-like kind of corporate rule that is updated for the era of, big tech. This is why he sort of fixates on like, well, Canada's not letting our banks in there. I mean, they're trying to knock down the final protections, right? And then that gets packaged as a compromise, like, okay, well, we won't take you over as the 51st state, but we're just going to have your water and, have even more unfettered access. So I think that the demand is the same thing that, we've always been demanding, which is an economic system, both nationally and internationally, that isn't only governed by what is, most profitable for multinational corporations, but also takes into account what our planet can handle, in a time of climate crisis, what our workers need to meet their basic needs. And I think it is compatible for Canada to think about how can we be a more shock-resistant economy? We're very vulnerable to trade shocks. We're very vulnerable to commodity shocks. Suddenly the price of oil collapses and all of Alberta goes into a tailspin. Whenever you are dependent on a single commodity or a handful of commodities or just a couple of trading partners, you are resilient to forces beyond your control. But if you, have a strong local market and a diversified economy, then it means that you're going to be more resilient in the face of any kinds of shocks. I don't see how that is incompatible with internationalism and multilateralism, which is, really something different. It's about countries coming together and, agreeing on, what is in their common interest, whether it's setting emission reduction agreements, other forms of pollution reduction agreements, enforcing international humanitarian legal agreements that we've already agreed to, but that we aren't enforcing. So I think the idea that trade and multilateralism are one and the same has just never been true. I think it's fully compatible for us to have, a robust, resilient national economy and commit ourselves to international cooperation.
So we're going to take one more question, and then we'll let Naomi go and thank her.
Thank you. Thank you for appearing, Naomi. My name is Matthew Sanderson. I do have a question. The reverb in here is throwing me off. When I was a young man, an Ontario premier said, "We shall build a railroad from Windsor to Quebec City." I'm older now. That premier, David Peterson, is much older, and that first spike has yet to be driven. My question is with respect to whose technology we should use to build this. No, it's a national project. It's a major project. Japanese, French, German, Chinese. Should we use some American technology in this? Should we attempt to homebrew this thing? We've relied on Americans. We've defaulted to American technology for electricity and voltage and everything else. It's a major decision. Our last Prime Minister said we should do it. I think a lot of people agree. It's billions and billions of dollars. It's more like Battleship than biscuits. And I just wondered if you had any opinion about what we should do on that, and if we go foreign, would that cause a resentment in America that would lock us out from any resale? Because if you do something big, you want to be able to do it again. Thank you.
Wow, it sounds like you know a lot more about this than me. Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that we don't have that kind of rail network speaks to the failures of investing in the infrastructure that we need. Whether it's electricity grids, or the kinds of value added, or just the networks that kind of weave a country together. We do need to do it in terms of where the technology comes from. I mean, I don't see why we would be rewarding the United States with our business at the moment. I think the extent to which we can source things in Canada, we should, but I don't think that we should allow that to slow us down too much. I've been doing more work now that I'm out in BC with my brother, Seth Klein, who was founder of the BC Center for Canadian for Policy Alternatives, Canadian Center for Policy Alternatives, and now had something called the Climate Emergency Unit, and wrote this book called A Good War about what Canada was able to do during the Second World War in terms of creating crown corporations in the face of, putting itself on emergency footing, and retrofitting factories, creating whole new industries, dozens of crown corporations to make that possible. So it really does show, I think it is worth looking at that period and the scaling up of manufacturing in Canada. He wrote that book arguing that we should be doing that in the face of the climate crisis, and I think that's still true because this one of the things about crisis is whatever the latest crisis is, it sort of shocks all the other crises into the background, but we are still in a climate emergency. And, dare I say, it might even be more important than the Trump emergency. And so maybe this is the catalyst to get us to do many of the things that we've been talking about for a long time. People in Toronto might remember a little thing we called the LEAP Manifesto that we launched exactly a decade ago in 2015, with tens of thousands of Canadians signing, hundreds of community organizations, national organizations, unions, which was really about the need to jumpstart a justice-based transition off of the extractive industries. And we still need to do it. Just because we didn't do it doesn't mean we can't do it. We still can. I in the shock doctrine, I made a Milton Friedman quote famous, where he had written in 1980 that only a crisis, real or perceived, produces real change. And when the crisis occurs, the change depends on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function, to keep the ideas ready until the politically impossible becomes politically inevitable. And I think that, for a long time, the left failed to have ideas lying around for moments of crisis. But I think a lot of us took it very seriously that we had to have our own ideas lying around when a crisis hits, and we are in one such crisis, and we're readier than we've ever been. I'm going to end it there, everyone. I got to run. Thanks all. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Naomi. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Happy to be with you. Bye-bye.
We're going to move on to announcements. We're going to have to do them pretty rapid fire. So John Cartwright, David White, Heather Sargent, and Jim Rutham. I'm giving you 60 seconds each. Hard deadline, so just to make sure everyone gets out on time. So you can go first.
Hi, good evening, friends. I've known a lot of you from 28 years ago in this church. My name's John Cartwright. I'm the chair of the Council of Canadians. Provided you with a small sticker that reprised something we were doing in 1988. No way A. We don't want to have the maple leaf there on the Stars and Stripes. Please pick it up. But more importantly, the Council of Canadians was formed 40 years ago in this kind of moment when we were in threat of being taken over by American interests and our own corporations, as Naomi had said, selling us out. Please go to Canadians.org and see the Canada we want. Because while we're proud Canadians, that's an inclusive Canada. Whether our families have been here 10,000 years or we've come 10 weeks ago to harvest and process our food. We're all Canadians. This fight demands we stand united. Canadians.org. Thank you very much. And if anybody wants more stickers, I have them at the front.
Thank you very much. David White. Is David White here?
People who were here 2 weeks ago remember that I raised the question of American war jets on our waterfront, suggesting that in the present context they would be insulting or even menacing to our national sovereignty. Some of us, a group, after the meeting, I approached Councillor Malloch, who spoke at the meeting, and she seemed quite interested in pursuing the issue. It was suggested that to heighten the issue in Toronto, it would be a good idea to get a resolution from Toronto City Council indicating that the war jets would not be welcome. Unfortunately, I haven't heard back from Councillor Malloch. I spoke to her after the meeting, followed up with some emails, but I haven't heard back. So I think what we have to do now is go on, see if we can find some other members of council who will take up the issue. Some people came forward after the meeting 2 weeks ago and indicated an interest in working on the issue. So if people want to come up later on, I'm up here in this part of the assembly. If you want to discuss it with me further, where we should take it from here, I'm really interested. I'm just going to indulge for a minute, please. Your 60 seconds.
We still have to sing just one last word, because we have to sing the anthem. We don't want to.
Beg your pardon?
Just like a couple more words.
Okay, I'll say a few things. The other thing I think, sort of related to what I just said, is I think as Canadians we have to question this conventional wisdom that's developing, not wisdom, conventional wisdom, that we should be spending 2% of our gross national product on armaments. I think we're being bullied into that position, not only by Trump, but also by Mark Rutte, of the General Secretary, the Secretary General of NATO. I think we have to start questioning that issue. I'm suggesting as well that perhaps this would be a good forum. Perhaps at a future meeting we could have some speakers on the matter and really pursue that matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now Heather Sargent.
Hi, my name is Heather, and I'm part of the team, a team that is working to grow the protest around the totalitarianism that is happening in the United States through a pledge to organizations and institutions to boycott American goods, similar to what Olivia Chow was talking about last week in the meeting here. So what we really do need is some people to help us with social media that we would deploy from our own platforms. So if this is you and appeals to you, please come and find me. I'll be in a gray sweater out in the hall. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And now we have Jim Rutham.
Hi, my name's Jim Rutham. I'd like to reference the answer that Naomi gave to the question I asked about how to fight back without doing with something that's positive for us and damaging to the other corporations. And that is the idea of changing the legislation that underpins their control over the digital space and then making it a criminal offense to fix software. This is something that we can fix. I have an ask and an offer. The ask is for everybody organizing an all candidates meeting to put that question on the agenda so that it gets asked at the, like it gets proposed to the offer is, I am building a speakers bureau so that all the people organizing those events can contact info@breaklocks.ca, and I will arrange, I will arrange through Civic Tech Toronto. We're having a meeting tomorrow when I'm going to gather a bunch of speakers who understand the issue and can speak to it and answer questions so that we can forcefully put that on the agenda. I would also like to ask if someone, I would like to also find out the list of, some way of getting the list of people who are organizing those events so that I can contact them.
So we're just gonna have John say a few words about the all candidates meeting and then sing O Canada and wrap up. I just wanted to quickly say that right now we're running this basically out of John's pocket in terms of renting the church. So we've put something on our website for people to make contributions to help support these events. So if anyone is interested in that, check out our website. We'd really appreciate the help.
At the last meeting, we formed groups to look for all candidates meetings in 12 different ridings, not bad. And I wanted to report on what I've learned. And I don't have full information, but I have some information. So there's a meeting in St. Paul's, Toronto riding, on April the 21st at St. Michael's and All Angels Church at Wychwood and St. Clair. They found an interesting thing. They've invited the Conservative candidate, Don Stewart. He said he'd like to come, but the upper people have told him he can't come. And we think that might be a problem with some other ridings. And what the strategy is that they're using in St. Paul's is they've got a couple of people who are phoning him. They're going to go and try and see him and say, come on, you got to come to that meeting. And if he doesn't come, at the meeting, they're going to write down the questions they'd like him to answer. And then a day or two after the all candidates meeting, they're going to call the media and say, we're going up to his campaign office with these questions and maybe we can get the answers. So that's an interesting strategy. On April 23rd in Toronto Danforth, they're having a meeting at the Bain Avenue Cooperative at 7 o'clock. That's a cooperative that's now 50 years old, which is pretty good. I think there are other all candidates meetings. I think there's one here in Toronto Centre. I don't know if you've got a date yet, but I know there's very active talk about it. In the Toronto Beaches, there is as well. And I think in Spadina, Fort York as well. But I don't have dates on those. As soon as I get those dates, we'll put them on the website. And there's one thing I want to say about the website. You may have seen bulletin number 3 that's posted on the website. It was sent out. And you'll notice there's no bulletin number 2. Now, I could say, well, that's just secret and you can't get to see it. I made a mistake in the numbers, okay? And sorry about that. One of the few mistakes I've ever made, as you know that. Let me just end with one comment before the closing. We talked last time about fixing local problems. And I think that's a growing focus. Certainly, Naomi talked about that as well. And I think it's getting more important. The tariff thing is obviously important, but as United States slides into lawlessness and authoritarianism, this is going to become more a problem. And one of the ways it's going to be a problem, I think, is that just as we used to have draft dodgers, I think we're going to have Trump dodgers coming to Toronto, a lot of them. And Toronto's been really good about accepting people from other places. The Italians after the end of the Second World War, the Hungarians in the 60s, in the 50s, and then the draft dodgers, and then the boat people in the early 80s, and the Syrians, and most recently the Ukrainians. We've done really good at that. The problem I see is that if you're a young person coming from the States saying, I want to get out of there, I want to come here, you're going to have a hard time finding a place to live. And we're never going to build the housing quickly enough. In fact, what we want to offer and what we offered draft dodgers in the 60s and early 70s was rooms and small apartments in existing houses. That's really hard to do in Ontario right now because we have such crummy laws in respect to landlord and tenant things. And in fact, as an example, if you're a landlord and you want to get rid of a tenant, it takes you 6 months to get a hearing of the Landlord and Tenant Board and another couple of months to get rid of it. So a lot of people are saying, I'm not going to rent anything, I'll never get rid of the tenant. And a lot of tenants are saying, I got no good way of dealing with bad landlords. And this is a provincial issue. And it just seems to me we have to start talking about those things. How do we improve that so that when in fact we're getting all these Trump dodgers, they've got a place to live? So we're going to have to start focusing on that, the local issues that particularly Ken Greenberg talked about last time, and figuring out how we can get them and how we can get our provincial legislatures to actually deal with those issues. I think that's going to be a large problem for us, and there's enough of us here that we can have an impact on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. So we're going to wind up with O Canada, and if Noah is still here, we would love... Noah's gone? Okay. Well, we're going to have to do it without him, but we were inspired. Biggest organ in Canada is going to play O Canada, so hopefully everyone will join in. On. We'll see you in 2 weeks. April 21st is our next meeting right here. Thank you.